Hi everybody, and welcome to a slightly different video from one of my normal updates on Troubles Restoration. I am currently editing the next update, but it's taking me some time. They're quite long videos to edit. I have like, I don't know, 3 odd hours of footage per day to splice up and make interesting for you to watch. I am still editing that video, don't worry, it will be coming. But to give you a video for this week, I've decided to make something slightly different, and I'm gonna introduce a new series, or a new playlist I think it's called on YouTube, called Troubleshooting, sharing my tips and tricks on how you can restore your own car. It's not gonna be specific to a Porsche 356, this is just gonna be specific to working on cars and the kind of troubles that you may encounter. I like to think I've become quite a pro at undoing rusty fixings, and I've found some ways that work really well. So the first video in the troubleshooting series is going to be my 5 top tips on how to undo a seized rusty fastening and fixing. Let's get into it. My first tip is to use the correct tools. Right, now that might seem obvious, but here I have some screwdrivers and some spanners. Let me also get some sockets and 2 different socket sets. Now, when it comes to screwdrivers, make sure that the screwdriver is the right size for the head of the screw. If you're undoing a big screw with a big slot in it, the last thing you want is a teeny tiny, like, this isn't an electrical screwdriver, but imagine it was. You know how small the heads are on those? The last thing you want is a teeny tiny screwdriver to undo a big screw. Likewise, if you're trying to undo a small electrical screw, you don't want something like this, or worse, you don't want something like this. Look at the size of this. You need to make sure that the head of the screwdriver properly fits in the head of the screw. This way you can make sure that the screwdriver doesn't ride out of the screw. So that's choosing the correct screwdrivers. Spanners. Now, how can you not choose the right spanner? Obviously you need to make sure the spanner size is suitable for the nut size or the bolt size that you're using. I'm going to assume it is, but you may have the choice when you're undoing a nut of an open-ended spanner or a ring spanner. Now, if you can, I always recommend to use the ring spanner on the head of the nut, not the open end. This makes sure that not only does the spanner not slip off, causing you to mangle the head of the nut or the bolt, but it also allows for much even force dissipation around the head of the nut or bolt. So where you can, use ring spanners. And then again, still on tools, make sure that your tool size, or size I guess is the best word, is suitable for the job. Here I have a 1/4 inch square drive socket set, and here I have a 3/8 inch square drive socket set. Now, in theory, you could probably get away with using both. You're not going to be able to apply as much force through a 1/4 inch square drive socket set as you can a 3/8 square drive socket set. And likewise, a 1/2 inch square drive socket set is going to allow you to apply even more force. But just be sensible about the size of socket set that you're using to undo it. For example, on Trouble, there were loads of, I think they're M5 9mm nuts and bolts. Bad example, because this socket set only goes to 10. But there were actually a few 10mm across flat M5s. I could have used this 1/2 inch square drive on it. Probably a bit overkill when this 1/4 inch square drive also goes up to 13mm, and likewise this 3/8 square drive set, this goes up to 22mm. So it's important to think about the forces that you're applying to these rusty fastening and fixings. If I chucked this 10mm socket onto this near on 1/2 meter long breaker bar, I'm going to be able to apply loads of torque to that rusty bolt. But if I haven't broken that rust bond, applying that torque is just going to increase my odds on shearing the bolt. Whereas if I put a little 10mm socket on this guy, I'm never going to get anywhere near the same kind of torque on this. So I can have much more force control. Similarly, if I really want to apply a little bit more torque, I can just go up to this 3/8 square drive. And again, I get a bit more than this one, but nowhere near the size of this. So just be sensible about your tool selection for the job. Don't go gangbusters and get all of the leverage in the world, because it's a good chance If the thing's rusted up solid, it's probably not going to undo. You need to get it moving first. If it's not moving and you opt for something like this, you're just going to shear it. So yeah, that is my first top tip. Use the right tools, and where you can, use ring spanners or sockets on the heads of nuts and bolts. Okay, so that's tip 1 out the way. Just clear this up. Oh. My next tip is, if you're still struggling to undo a rusty fixing using the correct tools, I would use some form of penetrating oil. Now, in my videos, you would have seen me use 2 types of penetrating oil. I use WD-40 and 3-in-1 oil. Now, I can already hear it or read it in the captions of this video. WD-40 is not a penetrating oil. I hate to break it to you, but you're wrong. Yes, WD-40 stands for water displacement, but any fluid is penetrating. It's capillary action. If the gap's tight enough, capillary action will force water through a small gap. WD-40 is oil-based. Capillary action turns it into a form of penetrating oil. The same way, 3-in-1 oil, it's a light oil. It's not necessarily a penetrating oil, but it will penetrate through small gaps and help lubricate a joint. Yes, there might be other penetrating oils out there that are better at breaking down any rusty bonds that have formed, but these two, they do the job. They've worked for me. I've used a lot of cans of WD-40 throughout this restoration. There are others out there that I've been told of. I've yet to try them, so I can't tell you if they're as effective or not, but there are other products out there like PB Blaster, I believe, and Croil, KR oil, Croil, something like that. I'm not sure how readily available they are in the UK, but apparently they work as a penetrating oil. My top tip when using this stuff is apply it to any rusty fixings 1-2 days before you come to try and undo them. Secondly, don't be shy when you use it. Really kind of soak that joint. You would have seen in some of my videos me going to town with a WD-40. This leads me on to my third tip: buy it in bulk. You're going to be using a lot of it, so if you can, do buy it in bulk. I purchase my stuff from Costco, which is it's like a, I think it's an American company. It's like big wholesale stuff. You can buy it in packs of 3 and it's quite cheap there. So yeah, buy it in bulk. It's not as expensive, so you don't feel so bad about using a lot of it. This WD-40 can is quite useful. It can come with this, I don't know, cover all nozzle, or if you want to be a bit more precise, you can have this little flexi hose on it. That's quite useful, but just make sure you don't squirt it in your face, or if you'll do, just wear the safety squints. That's my second top tip. Use penetrating oils. They help to lubricate a joint. If you've got it moving, it will help reduce friction between a threaded joint and also actually help break down any rusted bonds. My third top tip: if your tool of choice isn't working for you, you've put a whole can of WD-40 on the joint and it's still not coming apart, my third top tip is to get some force on it. These two little guys will become your best friends when it comes to a rusty fixing. And it's not to hit the car, it's actually to hit the fixing itself. I call it Shockin. I use Shockin to release stiction. The idea behind this is if you impact a joint, the force that translates through it can help shock it, which can then break any rusted bonds that have formed. Now, the key when you're going to use a hammer is that the force you apply actually translates to the thing that you're hitting. You want to make sure that that thing, whatever it is, typically a rusty nut or bolt, is actually solid in where it is, such that when you hit it, there is a reaction force against the hammer. If it's not solid and you hit it and it keeps, I don't know, springing or bouncing or vibrating or whatnot, the impact isn't doing the job. If that is the case, so when you're hitting something and it's springing around, what you need to do is get a mass behind the thing you're hitting to help provide a reaction force. Me and my dad often use things like a sledgehammer, or if you have anything else like a big lump of metal, that will do the job. You just want to hold it firm against the stud or whatever it is you're trying to undo, and then use the hammer to hit the head of the nut or bolt. Something to bear in mind if you are going to use a hammer is don't hit the threaded end of a stud. The hammer is a lot harder than the mild steel, and if you hit the threaded end, you can peen over the end of your thread and basically deform the threads on the edge of the stud, and then you'll never get that nut off, or you're making your life a lot more difficult. Not good. So yeah, if you are going to use a hammer, don't hit the threaded part, hit the head of the nut if you can. That is my third top tip. Get the hammers out, shock it, use Shockin to release stiction. If the hammers haven't worked, all is not lost. There is still other tips. So if the hammers haven't worked, I like to then get the hot air gun. Not just hot air gun, but I start using heat. So the principle behind heating up the rusted joint is that it causes thermal expansion, and that relative movement can then break any rust bonds that have formed between the threaded joint, whatever that joint is. I typically start off using a hot air gun. Why? It's in the garage, it's very readily accessible, and it doesn't get things too hot. So I have much better heat control using a hot air gun. It's a more gentle approach. If the hot air gun isn't working out for me, I start stepping it up. I go into my mum's kitchen without her knowing, and we have this pretty cool, I think it's a creme brulee torch. It's a blowtorch, a very small blowtorch. I think its intended purpose is to be honest, I'm not a cook, I don't really know, but I think it's to melt sugar on the top of creme brulees to caramelize them. For me, it's much better at undoing rusty fastenings and fixings. Not that my mum knows, although she probably will now if she sees this video. My top tip for this is just make sure you put it back. You'll never know. Go into the kitchen, go get it and use it, but put it back. My only issue with this, fortunately, we don't have creme brulees very often, if at all. I can't even remember ever having one. So it doesn't really affect me too much, but unfortunately, this is now empty. So next time my mum goes to make a creme brulee, if she ever does, she's gonna be slightly disappointed. But yeah, creme brulee torch, again, really helpful to heat up a joint. It's a little bit more controlled, it has a very small flame. That can help heat up a joint. If that's not working for you, you can get out something a little bit more heavy duty. This is a gas torch. So you have a big bottle of butane, I think. Oh, propane. Big bottle of propane, turn that on, turn this on, light it, and the explosion should separate the joint nicely. No, this just allows you to get a joint much, much hotter, but it's difficult to control the heat using it. It's never failed me, really. If none of this has worked and I get this out, the thing typically comes undone. I mean, how can it not when it's liquid, after all? So, so yeah, that's my fourth tip on undoing a rusty joint. The final tip, if none of this has worked, and actually I'd be lying, there have been cases where heating it up hasn't actually worked out for me. My final tip is, this is my fifth tip. If all of that has failed you, then to undo a really rusty fastening fixing, you can use a destructive method of cutting it off with the angle grinder. There's a few things to bear in mind when doing this. Number one is think about what it is you're cutting off. Like I spent 4 hours trying to undo a bolt that went into a captive nut that held on Trouble's bumpers. And the reason why I spent that time well, actually I shouldn't have anyway, because that battery box got binned. But I didn't know that at the time. But the reason why I spent all of that time persisting to undo that bolt that went into that captive nut is because I needed to get the whole bolt out. Just cutting the head off the bolt and taking the bumper off would have got the bumper off, but it would have left me with another problem of having to find a way to extract that cut off stud. So that didn't really solve my issue by cutting it off. So that's my first kind of thing to consider when you are going to get the angle grinder out, is does it actually make sense, or are you just moving the problem to something else? If it's a case where it's a fixing where it is a bolt and a nut, you can get to both sides. Sure, cut the head off the bolt or cut the nut off the bolt. Either way, whichever one you can get access to, that works. If it is a captive fixing, maybe think twice. Secondly, obviously it is an angle grinder. Think about your safety and the safety of other people. Use a guard if you can. In a lot of my videos, you might have seen me not using a guard. I don't always use a guard because of access. Yes, you can move them, but sometimes they're quite big. They can get in the way and you can't necessarily get the disc to where you need it. But if you can, use a guard. If not, just be very careful. Third tip, be careful again with where you're using the angle grinder. The purpose is just to cut off the bolt, right? You don't want to accidentally kind of nick your car and cause damage elsewhere. So just be very careful with where you're using it. Wear eye protection, safety squints. As much as we all laugh and joke about them, they aren't actually very good at PPE. So get out your, I think I've got a drawer full of them here. Get out your safety glasses. I don't know how many you need, but sometimes 3 will do the job. Wear safety glasses. And if you want, you can wear gloves. I don't wear gloves. The reason I don't wear gloves is my hands aren't the world's biggest hands, and most gloves don't fully fit me. And that can actually be more dangerous than you think. If the tip of the finger of the glove gets caught up in this and gets stuck in here, your glove's trapped, and that glove is then going to go round and around. I'll let you think about it. I don't want to think about it, but it's not going to be nice. So typically try not to wear gloves with rotating things. Just be careful of your hands. To finish on a happy note of you degloving your fingers, that is my final tip on how to undo a really rusty fastening and fixing. Now, there is a technique that I have saved till the very end. When you've actually got some movement, hopefully before this has come out, once you've actually got some movement, me and my dad, it's a well-known thing, but just to share it all with you in case you don't know, I don't think it's got a name. I call it like the me to you type of movement. And it's basically go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 2 turns forward, 1 turn back. Probably isn't actually going to be turns, because if you can get 2 full turns, you probably don't need to be doing this. But when a bolt has just given and it's still giving some resistance, instead of just constantly trying to undo it, if you go 2 forward or 2 movements forward, 2 bites forward, and then 1 bite back, get some more lubricating oil in there, then go another 2 forward and then 1 bite back, you'll slowly free off that joint. And the idea behind that is that the movement and the lubricating oil helps clear out those rusty threads, giving you a more of a clear runway to get that bolt off. So yeah, 2 bites forward, 1 bite back, and in theory, you shouldn't have a problem. So here we have it. Here are my 5 top tips to help you undo a seized bolt. You're going to start with using properly sized tools for the job. Think about the torque, the levers that you're going to be applying. If you feel like you're applying a bit too much force on the spanners and it's still not going, stop. And that's when you want to move on to things like the lubricating oils, then maybe shocking it with a hammer. Remember, get that bit of metal behind the joint so you're getting a good reaction when you apply a force to the fixing. And then finally, if that's not working, get some heat on it, and fingers crossed, combination of those 4 will get the thing undone. If that hasn't worked out for you, you can get the angle grinder out and cut it off. A final top tip for all of this is if you borrow anything from your mum's kitchen, make sure to put it back. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, please give it a like. If you have any questions about my process for undoing any rusty fastenings and fixings, please put them in the comments. If you have any more tips for me, maybe you have like a top secret tip for undoing a rusty fastening fixing, get it in the comments, share it, let's help each other. And finally, if you don't want to miss any more troubleshooting series like this, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.